Hello, folks, and welcome back to the Best Show Ever podcast, the podcast where I interview folks about the best concerts they ever saw in their lives. I'm your host, Cam Herdt. And man, a really cool week we got going on over here. I know I say that every single week on every single episode all the time, but it's true. I mean, this is one of my favorite weeks we've had come down the pike here with three really fantastic interviews with three very cool people. But the one you're listening to right now, one of the coolest people that I've gotten to chat with and also kind of get to know here over the last year. Uh, Talking to Matt Busch on the podcast today. Matt has had an incredible career in our scene in the music industry for the last 25 years. He has been able to manage some incredible acts and some incredible artists. He started off working with the Allman Brothers. He's through that worked with Warren Haynes and Derek Trucks and O'Teal and a host of incredible musicians. He also got to work with Phil Lesh, and then he also got to work with Bob Weir for the longest time. And so this guy has seen some very, very cool concerts in his time working, but he was working all those. And so we get into that a little bit. He talks about his career a little bit, very humbly, but we do get into his best shows ever, the ones that he's seen, and those are just as legendary, to be honest. I don't want to blow it for you guys, but we talk about one of my favorite Dead shows of all time, in a very cool era for the Grateful Dead in that late 80s, early 90s era there. And Matt has had a cool impact on the things that I do. He was able to help me get into the Saturday show in Oracle Park for the final weekend for Dead and Co. And has become a resource for me within this scene. He's such a genuine guy and a kind guy, and he has not hesitated to help out. And so can't appreciate him enough. He's essentially my first shout out this week, on top of being the guest. You'll hear from him for the next hour, I promise. Couple other shout outs that I wanted to give on the podcast this week. One of those is going to be Lovable Losers. Lovable Losers is a apparel vendor, tie-dye guy, designer, artist, SoCal guy. Most importantly, you see him at almost every event out here in Los Angeles. And he's made some really great stuff, especially over the last year. If you guys got a chance to see his Hollywood Bowl shirt for Fish, it was fantastic. And he makes stuff for everything. I mean, he made a great shirt for House Band that came through the other day. Just a great guy to know within the scene here in Southern California. If you haven't seen his stuff and you're coming to shows here in California, check out Lovable Losers on Instagram. If you're looking him up, it's Lovable 333 Losers. And so that's a great account to follow. And then the other person I want to shout out is someone who I started working with recently. Is Jailbird Pictures. It's a production videographer, and he and I have started interviewing people on the street outside of shows while they're waiting to get in, getting some best show evers out there and on the street on tour. I posted our first kind of rough draft crack at it on my Instagram, but there's going to be more to come with that, and maybe some more long form videos for you guys to partake in and maybe even be a part of if I run into you out on the street outside of one of these shows. But his name's Jeremy. He's been great so far to work with, and I definitely want to do more of those. And so you'll be seeing more from Jailbird Pictures through what we do over here at Best Show Ever. So huge shout out to him. That's just about enough intro out of me. I want to make sure that you guys just get straight into this Matt Busch conversation because it's a fantastic one. But first, here's just a little bit of music from a band called Loom with their song What I Mean.
All good.
How generally was Mexico? I'm sure
it was fantastic.
A lot of fun, but
it was one of my favorite weekends down there, a week. So I guess it's a weekend for most and a week for us. It was just, it's first time we've really done an event like that with people that aren't regularly in our war. I mean, it's usually it's been Dead and Company, and which feels like an extension of the tour, and it's great because it feels like Dead and Company gets a little bit of a family vacation in the middle of a year. But this time having Derek and Susan and Sturgill and Rick and Margot and Brittany and whoever else I'm leaving out of this, even the other bands like Lettuce, Oteil and Friends, like they've never really been a part of this in this way. And so it was like, it was just like seeing people enter Grateful Dead world kind of for the first time. And there's just always a little bit of that sort of extra excitement. And then when things like, you know, like the rain during Looks Like Rain, which was pretty tremendous. Like there was, people were taking out their radar on their phones and there's not a cloud in the sky, but the second that song started, it started pouring. And the second that song ended, it stopped. There was never a cloud on the radar. The same thing happened the next night during the wheel. And for us, it's like, yeah, you know, another day out with these guys. I mean, it's always
Right.
special, but still this stuff has happened before. But to those people who have never, like, wait, what? You know, really seeing their minds blown by some of the magic that happens around Grateful Dead was kind of cool to see. And it's, you know,
Yeah, that has to add something for it, for you guys having kind of guests in the house, you know, guests on
yeah, that
vacation with you. You know, you go on family
exactly.
vacation every year, but if you go with you know, you bring the Hendersons one year, it's like a different energy.
Yeah, yeah, and like seeing, you know, Derek Trucks, Sturgill Simpson, and Rick. I'm gonna have to pronounce his last name now. I guess Rick Mataratonda. I
Perfect.
hope I came close.
Perfect.
Sorry, Rick. Sorry, Ben. And just like they were thick as thieves together. It was like inseparable all week. You know, the three guitar players kind of just, you know, trading, just jamming together, trading charts, and you know, it was cool to see. It was definitely a different
Yeah,
kind of excitement.
yeah, I got to hear you talk a little bit about that on Ryan's podcast, Always Almost
Hmm.
There, and just the rehearsal process. But like, how familiar are you with working with Derek and Rick and those guys in general, and Susan and Sturgill?
So Derek and Susan I go way back because I used to work for Warren Haynes and then by extension the Allman Brothers. So I
Cool.
was around working Beacon Theater shows when they first like met each other and started getting together. And they've also, you know, by stroke of luck in a way, two of my closest friends, one touring and one who I actually went to high school with, are Tedeschi Trucks Band tour manager and production manager
Oh
front of house.
wow.
Actually do know them and a lot of their camp really well. So it was kind of cool to get to do that with them. They were actually the first of the musicians to reach out to me and text me about songs and stuff. And you know, we've done stuff before when Susan set in with Wolf Bros. So that was sort of like a little reunion style. And Rick is, you know, fairly new relationship. I've known him a little over than a year, I guess now, going back to Mexico last year. Sturgill brand new, and Margot's been around our camp forever. So that was sort of like, you know, bringing an old friend who comes to sit in occasionally on a song or two, who's finally gets a chance in the band. So that was kind of cool from that angle. And Brittany, we've had sit in with us before. Every Looks Like Rain she does with Bobby just gets better and better. It's really incredible.
I mean, it kind of no duh, but I was very jealous seeing those pictures from down there. I was like, wow, this could have been a very special weekend indeed. But and you know, you've been a part of some incredible shows, Matt. Some of the most
Yeah.
incredible shows. But you know, we're going to talk about some of the ones that you've attended today.
Yeah.
Ones
I
that
mean,
you
I'm
kind of
probably
got
gonna
to
have to
sit
mix
back
in
and
some of the
relax.
ones I've worked down the road, but yeah, we're
Yeah.
definitely gonna start with ones I just went to. So yeah, where do we want to start? I think
Let's
first
start
show
with
I
the first.
attended, if I remember.
Yeah,
Yeah.
first one
So
ever. Yeah.
as dumbly predictable as it's going to sound, the first concert I ever saw at 14 years old was the Grateful Dead at Madison Square Garden.
Wow.
September 14th, 1988. It was the first of a 9-night Madison Square Garden run. I went with a good friend of mine growing up, who I'm actually still friends with. He comes out every year when we come through Boulder with Dead and Company, and I get to see him and so I believe it was him. His dad. I can't remember if it was both parents. I know there was definitely one parent with a bunch of 14-year-olds taking the Long Island Railroad train into New York City to go to Grateful Dead show at the Garden. I feel like maybe his younger brother was with us, and then at least another friend. I'm other than him and his dad, I have lost track of who else was with us.
Yeah.
But we took the train into the city. It was a school night for sure, and went to opening night at the Garden. And I mean, I actually didn't know a lot of the songs they did that night, but it really didn't matter. I was just blown away. And it isn't, you know, historically, it's not a show that really ranks very highly. It looks great on paper, but I remember it got trashed in the New York Times review. It got trashed in the newspaper. Like everything I tried to read about, it just kind of dumped on this show. Even some of the, later on when I would get like a Relics or some of the Grateful Dead magazines. Remember, 1988, you couldn't go on Twitter and already find out how much the show sucked before it's over.
Right.
If you didn't
Thank
know
God.
people who were there, you had no one to talk about it with. Not only that, if you didn't know people who were there, you didn't know what they played the night before. So,
Yeah.
it was really a lot different. But everywhere I looked to find some review of the show, it was not a good one. And I just remember thinking, like, is it me? Like, am I just so excited? Like I was so young, I had no idea. But that was the first show I ever attended and got into. Strangely enough, on a family vacation a year earlier, we stayed at a hotel that now is a regular concert venue for me. It's called Humphreys by the Bay. And we were just doing a family trip and going through San Diego at that time, but it's a concert venue. And the Everly Brothers were playing there that night. And my brother and I, if I was 13, he was probably 8. We did everything we could to sneak into that venue, but we could not do it. And we sat listening to the Everly Brothers by the pool. So that would be the first one of the only shows I ever didn't get into. But good thing, because I think it's a better story for my life story that I saw the Grateful Dead is actually the first ever concert I ever saw.
I mean, it's too good. It's too on the nose. It's right
it
there.
is too on the nose, but it is what it is. I can't, I wouldn't even be good at making up a different story to pretend that wasn't the case. But
was one of your friends like the Deadhead friend that was we were there for them
Yeah.
that night, and then you kind of got turned on to it for real? Or
that was my friend Josh Berman, though he succeeded with the turn on process about a year earlier. And had given me some tapes, and I feel like maybe we watched a pay-per-view at his parents' house back when they did those things. And so the tapes had me hooked. I remember Wharf Rat really standing out, Throwing Stones, and just the I was a drummer growing up, so the drum pounding on Throwing Stones, and then learning about Mickey and his world music and all that. Like, I got in on that angle, and pretty young. Like I said, 13 is when I first heard tapes and started the transition from being like a heavy metal Iron Maiden kind of person into that world. It was a pretty quick transition, because there was also, like, back when you made cassette tapes for people, whatever you wanted to make them didn't always fill the whole tape. So he, on one of the tapes, put like 3 songs from the Best of the Band on the B side, and it was Shape I'm In, Up on Crickle Creek, and The Wait. And there was a period of time where I just listened to those 3 songs on repeat. I knew it wasn't Grateful Dead, and I knew it, I was too young to even figure out, but I knew there was some other band out there I'm going to have to dive into someday soon. It's very interesting. It was the band, because in about 20 minutes, it's going to make even a lot more sense.
Oh, wow. Never got a hint
I just put that together. I just got put that together now. I can't even say I planned that, preview or whatever you want to call it.
I mean, it just works out perfect. Everything's been working out perfect.
Yep. Sometimes.
What about a night that didn't work out so perfect? Do you have a worst show that you've ever attended?
I have the worst show that I'm going to pick for that. I've seen many, but I felt like it would be unfair, because you work in the music industry, you see a lot of shows of bands you don't know or don't like, or know you don't like going in, but you go anyway. And I didn't really want to pick a show of a band that I knew I wasn't going to like going in, because it almost seems unfair.
Right.
I do really love Van Morrison. Recent politics aside, musically, I do really love Van Morrison.
For sure.
And he is kind of hit and miss in concert. And it was not too long after, I want to say it was summer '89 at Jones Beach. It might have been summer 1990. But he came through Jones Beach that summer. And as a high school kid living on Long Island, I mean, I was down at Jones Beach if there was a concert, period. Like I was just obsessed with live music after that first Grateful Dead show. And I just wanted to see everyone and everything. And that was kind of my mission. I also live walking distance to Nassau Coliseum. So it was like, I had access even on Long Island without jumping on the train to all this music. And I love Van Morrison. And that night he did maybe a 60-minute set. And even at 15, 16 years old, it felt like he didn't want to be there. He mumbled through the hits, maybe sang his heart out on a tune or two no one knew, and then he was gone from the stage before I even realized he started, it felt like. And I just remember it was like barely 9:45 at night, and looking at my friend like, that's it? Is that a set break? And the lights are up, everyone's leaving, and we were just like, that's all he's gonna do? And you know, it was, I mean, it probably left a dozen songs we were hoping to hear on the table, and it was really disappointing. It really just felt like, you know, this is a guy who didn't want to be here on that night. And thankfully I saw him in a really epic show years later. Did a co-headline with Bob Dylan at the, whatever they call the little theater now that's attached to Madison Square Garden. And so he did a double bill with Dylan there. And that night, I guess it was like a 5-6 night run. And that day, actually, the New York Times had reviewed an earlier night and just trashed Van Morrison. So he actually got on stage with something to prove that night, and then went into an improv rant about the writer of that review. And I was like, this is the guy I want. This is the guy I knew existed. It wasn't Derek Jones Beach, however many years ago. I don't, this show was probably 95, 96. I mean, I'd have to look it up, but that was a good Van Morrison show. So he did thankfully make up for it later on. And I do believe there's only 2 times I've seen him, actually.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those greats that live you can get one of those shows. I mean, Dylan is that way, and
Yep.
there's a bunch of different artists that are, I mean, undoubtedly one of the greatest singers or songwriters or performers that you could ever see, just not on every night of the tour.
Definitely not that nice.
And sometimes it's famously so, you know, and if that's the only time you ever see him, then that would be you know, a tragedy, because then that's like the story you tell people. You got to walk around and be like, yeah, actually, I saw Van Morrison, it wasn't very good. You know?
and I wasn't going to give up on him on that one night. I do remember thinking I have to see him again or something, you know. But it took a while before the opportunity came, but I'm glad I did, because otherwise that would be my only and maybe I would have given up on him sooner, who knows.
It's too good of a catalog, and he just puts out so much music. I mean, even if you were to go see him now, like I have a friend that saw him in the last 5 years that was like, you know, it was a lot of music I didn't know, and there was a lot of stuff. I mean, he's got that incredible catalog, but he could end up just being like, I'm playing this tonight because I want to. And you know,
that's the thing. You're going to catch him in the actual mood he's in, for better or for worse, you know.
Kind of beautiful, kind of nice.
In a way, it'll be authentic, that's for sure.
It's not fake. It's not fake. Well, it's hard to pick your best show ever. I'm sure you've seen so many. Impossible to pick your best show ever. And it's also maybe even hard to pick some honorable mentions. But do you have a couple of shows that you would be remiss if you didn't bring them up on that?
I'm going to call my best show ever a run of 3 shows, actually.
Awesome.
And it's Grateful Dead, March 28, 29, and 30, 1990 at Nassau Coliseum. Wow. I was 16 and a half-ish. And these shows were on a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday night. And I was a junior in high school with my SATs on the Saturday morning.
Oh my God.
So I actually wasn't allowed to go to the Friday night show, and it was being broadcast on WNEW FM radio anyway. So my parents figured, you don't have to go. You can listen on the radio at home. And I convinced them to let me go to my friend's house down the street to listen to the show, which, again, I live so close to Nassau Coliseum. We didn't just listen to the show at home. You know, having, you know, a year and a half had gone by, I'd seen that Grateful Dead show. I think I'd seen one at the Meadowlands. I'd seen a couple of Garcia Band shows actually in between there, with Bob and Rob opening, which was really cool and different. But like, I remember, you know, this is a year and a half later, and I'd read a lot of not good reviews of the one show I saw. So I was kind of like itching for that good show that everyone will think will be a good show kind of thing. And, you know, they had, you know, I think we had gotten word, again, 1990, can't go on Twitter and see what they played so far leading into the tour. You just got to know people who were there, or find someone in the lot who's got like print out, you know, people would go to copy places and print out tour set lists to hand out, you know, to help people get, you know, caught up and things like that as you wander around Shakedown back then. So we knew they had, earlier in the tour, they'd busted out a Beatles tune for like the first time in a few years, I think Revolution. So we sort of had gotten wind that it's, you know, I also think there's the tour that, no, it was a year later. I'm a year off on that, but a couple of things had come out, so there was a little extra excitement. Built to Last had just come out in October, so, you know, Brent was kind of playing on fire at all these songs out there. And so opening night, we went in ready, you know, revved up and ready to go. First set was great, but the second set's kind of where it got really interesting, because it was a really out of the box set to opening. It started with like Foolish Heart. There was a
Mm.
really on fire Cumberland Blues.
Mhm.
I was with one same friend I was at the first show with, and then a couple other friends, and we had, Coliseum. I mean, everything felt so loose back then compared to how it is now. We watched that show. We climbed down from our upper deck seats, and we were in like the New York Islanders bench, players bench, right
Wow.
off the floor, and that's where we were watching. And there was a whole. We weren't the only people there. There was like 20, and no one seemed to care. Like no one came to check our
Yeah.
tickets or kick us out of there ever. I mean, we just were in this like cool spot. So which was the equivalent to maybe 15, 20 rows back on Phil's side. And then they started a very familiar chord, and my friends and I start turning to each other like, "What is this? Wait a minute, I know what this is. It's Shape I'm In. No, it's Up on Crippled. No, it's like we knew it was a band song, and it
Yeah.
was The Weight. Once he started singing,
Wow.
like, oh, once that, we're like, holy fuck! And then we're like, they've never done this before. We're seeing
Oh,
like, at 16 years old, we're seeing that Grateful Dead history moment, night one. And it was just trying. I'm getting chills talking about it. Like the
yeah.
roar of the crowd when the recognition of that song started. I don't think I'd ever heard anything so loud in my life.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting in the arena where the Islanders had won 4 Stanley Cups a few years before. Like, but I had never heard anything that loud in my life. Like people were just absolutely losing it. The sing along of the chorus was just deafening. I just couldn't believe what we heard. It was just absolutely incredible. And then they came out of Drums in Space, and my all-time favorite Grateful Dead song is Wharf Rat, which they did not do the first show. I
Yeah.
saw the second, but they came out of Space. Other one, Wharf Rat. And then I believe it was Good Lovin' or Throwing Stones in Good Lovin'. But that was my first Wharf
Wow.
Rat, and it crushed. And then they came back for the encore and did Revolution, which would be the second one in however many years. And I'll never forget like this clear view of Jerry on the stage and the smile on his face singing to an audience full of people. I mean, I wasn't tripping yet at that point in life, but
Yeah.
it's going to be all right. And that sing along and that smile on his face. And it was like, there's just very little better than this. I mean, like it was like wearing a warm blanket, and the show ended and we went home, and then for the first time in my life, I was like, I get to go in tomorrow. This is what it's like. Like this was, it felt like everything that I thought was missing from that first show now was starting to appear, and we'd only done one night. And I'm like, I remember being in school the next day, walking out to lunch, and I'm like, I'm going to see the Grateful Dead in like 6 hours. And like, I'm on tour, even though I'm in high school, because I'm seeing 3 shows in a row. And, like, it was just like that feeling just took over. And, and both my parents' house and my high school is walkable to Nassau Coliseum. So it's like, I'd see a Volkswagen van drive down Hempstead Turnpike, but like, it's a Deadhead. It's like,
Yeah.
it just suddenly felt like that the whole community was involved. Like somehow the Grateful Dead were like in taking over the community in a way, and it's my little hometown on Long Island that no one's ever heard of, and it just had this like really extra amazing feeling to it. So we went back for night 2, and then I'm going to preface this with saying my dad is a big old time jazz head. He's on the board of the Coltrane Home Foundation.
Wow.
Coltrane, that's his, Coltrane. He was a piano player, so McCoy Tyner, Thelonious Monk, like that kind of jazz is what we got brought up on. And as I was getting into the Grateful Dead, I remember him once asking me, well, what's the most out there Grateful Dead song? If you're going to try to get me into them, you need to give me what like the most out there thing they've got, where the song completely destructs and you don't even know what they're playing anymore. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to try him with Veneta 82772. That feels like, the Bird Song and the Dark Star. That ought to get him.
Yeah.
And a couple of days later, he brought it back to me as like, this is actually tame compared to what I was even playing back when I was in college. I'm like, well, fuck,
Okay.
I got no chance here. So table that discussion. So we go, and the first set opens with Jack Straw Bertha. That was just phenomenal. And Jack Straw is one of my favorite ways to open a show. Really love it. And it's just a 1-2 combo that I live for. So, we were off to a good start, and then there's a Brent tune, and then Bobby steps up to the mic to speak, which never happens. And he says, well, we have a special guest or something like that, and brings out Branford Marsalis for the first time ever. And so suddenly after that night 1, which we thought was historic, now this is happening,
Yeah.
and they do a Bird song that just absolutely, blows your mind away. And then they close the set with Promised Land. Branford walked off, and Separate comes, and we're like, we're all looking at each other like that can't be it for Branford, right? He's got to come back. And starting to think, well, if he comes back, what could he do? And sure enough, they come back out, and they actually flipped. They did Eyes Estimated this night, which was
Oh,
different.
cool. Yeah.
But they came out with Branford and opened up with that Eyes and that Eyes of the World, and it was just
Yeah.
like it was
That's
incredible. And they
that's the one to me, that's the
yeah,
one
that's
I've
the
listened
one.
to a
And they
billion
did a
times.
Dark Star, right? They did Dark Star, of course, and then the set close with a Rock and Love Light. And I remember just getting home and being so excited. My dad, of course, waited up for me every night I went to this stuff because he smart guy.
Yeah, right.
Make sure I make it home. And I was so excited to tell him that Branford Marsalis sat in with the Grateful Dead, and he perked up a little bit and was like, that's something I'd like to
Yeah.
hear. And then made some crack about it. It would have been better if it was Winston Marsalis. He was just being a smart ass. And
Right.
that definitely helped. So it was this run was coming together, and it was historic in Grateful Dead world. It was historic just for me going to concerts, and now it was like becoming a bridge to my dad. It was like in my community, like it was just everything was kind of coming together perfectly. And then we snuck out the last night and went, and they opened the show with Helps at Franklin's, and it was a pretty stacked set list for the last night of that run. And the encore was Addicts of My Life, which was only the third or fourth time that had been done since 1970, when it came back that fall. And so I left that knowing I need to, that was it. I was hooked. That was gonna be, if the Grateful Dead weren't already becoming my identity by then, it was cemented now, and so those were I look at those three as like really life-changing concerts for me, because it really cemented my fandom for them. And I felt rewarded, like being so young and having, when you grew up in the 80s, 90s like that, you feel like you missed the 60s, I was just missed the 60s, or, just missed I was alive in the 70s, but I didn't really live in the 70s. I was born to 7 years old, but so you felt like you missed these decades where all this incredible music happened with this band. When you're this young going to shows, everyone's to tell you how it's not like it used to be. Oh, you should have seen Pigpen, or you should have seen Keith and Donna, but here we were, like they were giving us Grateful Dead history shows that people still talk about now. I mean, we still chase bringing Branford Marsalis out to our shows all these, and I'm a big part of that. Anything I could do to get Branford back to a show because of how impactful that was for my life. And so it felt like all that you missed it. Well, no, it's still happening right now. Like this all just happened, and look at how it blew all these people away. And and then they were gone. And I remember wanting so badly, I could still hear these voices in my head, people who were so excited to be going to Greensboro next. I was like, man, I wish I was going to Greensboro, but I have the SATs to take tomorrow and I don't drive yet, so I have no way to get there.
Well, it's so funny to hear you talk about the way that the Dead was talked about in that era, because as a guy who listens to a lot of Fish, and I'm 20 years past their their 60s, their great run and everything. There is a lot of, obviously, online now. We have all of the we have 100 million podcasts to talk about it, all this kind of stuff. Getting into why this era was great, and why this era is great, and all that kind of stuff. At the time, did you feel like going to a Grateful Dead show was like, well, let's see the end of this story for this band? Or did you feel like you were going into these vibrant new experiences that was like them pushing their sound forward?
For us as teenagers, I mean, it was all new and exciting, and because I'd spent a lot of time now going to other concerts, I'd seen, since that first Grateful Dead show, I got to Pink Floyd at Nassau later that summer, and then just the standard rock tour stuff. I saw Tom Petty. I saw an amazing show at CW Post Tillis Center with Bob Dylan and young upstart Lenny Kravitz opening for him,
Wow.
and Lenny blew us away that night. I mean, he
Yeah.
Hendrix covers, and I mean, he was phenomenal. And then when we left the show that night, he's just standing in the parking lot leaning on a Cadillac like just some other guy hanging around, and we got to talk to him for a while. And so we'd gone to a lot of shows, other concerts and things. I mean, you name the touring now classic rock back, and I'm sure I saw them that year, 89, 90. But there was something different when we were going to see the Grateful Dead. It was a whole different, we dressed differently. We you know what I mean? Like if I went to see Tom Petty, I could have gone straight from Little League practice and gone like that, but like for Grateful Dead felt like we prepared, like there was
Yeah.
just a different attitude, a different atmosphere, a different like planning and plotting was like a little more serious, like the okay, what time we're gonna get to Lot and the shakedown. Like, you didn't plan for the John Cougar Mellencamp shakedown at Nassau Coliseum, in
Right.
1989 or it just wasn't a thing. And Nassau Coliseum was known for tailgating. I mean, because it's the perfect suburban tailgating parking lot. It's just an arena in the middle of a giant parking lot, right off a main street, right off a parkway. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very self-contained and it's set up for that kind of tailgating hang for Islanders games. So it always had a raging shakedown, but it never had that for other concerts. It's the Grateful Dead just brought this sort of carnival atmosphere, and you planned for it more like a day than just going to a show for a few hours. It was like 3 or 4 o'clock you were getting your plan in motion, whereas if you just go to a normal concert, you have dinner and then figure out when you're going to leave the house. So it still was special to us, and yeah, we kept doing it. Obviously, as we got a little older and guys started getting driver's license, we started going to all the Albany shows, and then we started going to and suddenly, shows in Jersey weren't really that far away anymore. And then they'd come back and do the garden runs. And so it just, living in the Northeast, it was easy to see a lot of Grateful Dead shows in a year without having to travel too hard. And we took full advantage of that. And then the same when Fish came around. And I would give an honorable mention. I went to college in SUNY Albany. And so I was lucky in where we saw a whole bunch of us from school went up to Glens Falls Civic Center and saw Fish Halloween '94 when they did the White Album,
Wow.
and their first ever Halloween. Now, I actually remember we got the newsletter. I'll never be able to pronounce what they called that thing they would mail out to everybody. It was one of those weird Fish names that only they could come up with. And I remember voting for Dark Side of the Moon. As I think won that year in reality, because we all knew lots of people voted for Dark Side of the Moon, and no one seemed to know anyone who voted for the White Album. And Fish wasn't that big a community back then, like that was their biggest, one of their bigger venue shows. We'd seen New Year's '93 the year before, and I think that was one of their first arena plays ever, really. If I'm remembering right, someone else can correct me, because I Fish history isn't as good as my Grateful Dead history. But that felt, yeah. I mean, we knew whatever album they were going to cover, they being their first Halloween covering an album, we were seeing something historic, And the White Album was, I mean, no one was like, oh fuck, like we voted for something else. We were like, oh fuck yeah, you would have forgotten that we wanted something else, even the moment back in the USSR started. Like holy shit, not only are we getting the White Album, this is going to go on for a while. This is going to be amazing, because there was another whole third set coming too. And so, and I feel like that show ended like in some ungodly hour. I might be just, I might be remembering a little differently, but I felt like it was a show that started at 7:30 and ended at 1 a.m., which isn't normal for an arena concert. But that also could be selective memory. And yeah, I saw the most I saw Fish in my life was '97, '98, and so I, like many people then, we do spend a lot of time talking about how many Fish shows we saw in that era. But I don't, while that might be my favorite Fish era, I don't know that they're playing any worse right now. I mean, which is a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, and I mean, in a similar way, me and my younger brother and our friends feel like we are getting shows that would stack up, if you're someone who's stacking up shows, with any of their great eras. I mean, some of the shows that we've gotten to see were same thing within our first couple 5 shows, and it was like, wow, I finally just got what I know to be a special Fish show, and that's what you're hunting when you see these shows, is like, we're gonna go see the Grateful Dead, but I kind of want to see like,
that show, and that's
the big one, yeah.
And that was what I felt like I missed in '88 and '89, and so '90, yeah, they really came through in '90, and then Brent passed that summer, which was sad. But that fall, I was at all the Garden shows, MSG shows, and they were tremendous. They had Hornsby in the band. They were doing this pre-drums improv that they'd never done before. I mean, we were worried after Brent died, because I was a huge Brent fan, and it's like, how are they going to replace this guy? It didn't even make sense to me. And I didn't really know who Vince Welnick was, but I knew and was a fan of Bruce Hornsby. And it was another bridge to my dad, who, as a piano player, was also a fan of Bruce Hornsby, even just the pop music. I mean, we had all of Hornsby's records in our house long before him and the Grateful Dead were ever spoken in the same sentence, though he was a part of that. He was an opening act and sat in on the last show of that '88 Garden Run, which was a Rainforest benefit, but no one was thinking of him being in the band. Hall & Oates were on that show, so there were other pop people on that show, and no one really ever thought twice about it. Suzanne Vega was on that show. So when he was in the band, that was like, okay, now I'm excited again. Like, I was worried about what's going to happen after Brent, but if it's Bruce Hornsby, fuck yeah. You know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
As
then
a
that sort of
as
leads, you know, go ahead.
Oh, and it's just as a younger Dead fan in that moment, were you worried about like them continuing and
Yeah. We had no
uh,
idea what was going to happen next. There was no internet to go find rumors. There was no, you know,
yeah,
you know, we're just in the dark until someone hears something. I remember, we were already sneaking into bars at that point to see dead cover bands, and our local dead cover band was called the Zang Tricksters, and um, their keyboard player and guitar player are now in Dark Star Orchestra, and both actually had been in Phil and Friends, Rob Baracco and Jeff Mattson. So we used to sneak into the right tracking in Freeport as 15, 16-year-olds who convincing, now I'm realizing that we never fooled anyone with our fake IDs. They just let us in. There's no way we look 21, and especially me, who was still getting ID'd when he was 27.
right.
There's no way, but we were regularly chasing that music then, as much as we could. And then I was going to say, with Hornsby, it sort of all comes back to, I wanted to talk about probably the favorite run of shows I ever worked or produced, or however you want to phrase it. And that, without a doubt, is Fairly Well.
Yeah.
And I've talked about a lot about those shows, but like, to get the Dead and Trey and have Bruce in the band, I was like, about the only guy missing that week was Brandon from Marsalis for me. I was like, it felt like
Right.
in a way that, it felt reaffirming in a way, because the band put together the band, if it was only up to me, that I would have put together. You know what I mean? Like if they said, Matt,
Right.
go put together our Fairly Well band, other than a sit-in spot from Brad from Marsalis and maybe a sit-in spot from Donna Jean, they put together my band, Trey and Hornsby and Jeff. I mean, that was
Yeah.
what I wanted. And I remember, we weren't sure if Trey would be a hard or easy sell or not, but I remember talking to his manager and just sort of being like, hey, if he doesn't do it now, when is it going to happen? And if it never ever happens, when it's too late for it to ever happen, which it will be at some point in our lifetimes,
Hmm.
we're all going to wish we did this someday. So, if he's on the fence at all, and you could twist that arm just a little bit, like, we're all going to regret if we never did this someday. And thankfully he did it, and he was phenomenal. And that whole band, I mean, I was actually listening back to Trey and Bruce sang the Golden Road together, and I'd actually listened back to that before putting together the Deadhead Fest, where Rick and O'Teal sang Golden Road. And I saw it. It's funny because when I listened back to Trey and Bruce doing it, I could hear, oh, O'Teal and Rick could do this. Uh,
Yeah.
so so it helped one lead to another in that sense. But Fairly Well, Shapiro and I still look back on it all the time, and often go, how the fuck did we pull that off? But um, it it was far and away the largest event I was ever a part of at the time. I'd never done a stadium show before, working side of it, or producing, forget it. But in the middle of it, I don't think I appreciated the enormity of it, because in these big stadium size events, because of how spread out everything is, I have to limit my footprint. So I don't get to really get out to shake down much in a stadium, or even go visit a friend sitting in 212, because it could take me half the set to get there, and then I have to turn around and go back. So I didn't really appreciate the enormity of it until we flew home after the last show, and my car was still up in the Bay Area from the Santa Clara shows. So, and I planned it this way, where I would take a slow 2-3 day drive home, maybe hit the one, take the one, do the scenic route, stop someplace, just sort of decompress a little bit. And because it was an intense block of time for sure. And the first night I stopped, and I was like, I want to watch, I had all what we streamed them all, and I had whatever, well, I had some savers where I could go back and watch all the streams. And I remember when I wanted to put on opening night of Soldier Field first, and the opening shot is the blimp in the sky over the stadium with like a banner and the announcement. I mean, I was like, oh my God, we produced the Super Bowl. Like, that's kind of when it
Yeah.
hit me. Like, this is the same opening shot of like the Super Bowl if it was at Soldier Field and the Bears were playing the Niners or something.
Exactly.
And like, that's when, and in that moment, sitting in a hotel room, is when it hit me. Holy fuck, what the hell did we just do?
Yeah.
Like it didn't really occur to me how enormous cultural event that was at the time, until after the fact, because I was just so in the thick of it, in the middle of it. And my entire footprint basically being the stage, backstage, the bus, the hotel, I mean, our movements were so limited due to time, that like I don't think, in the moment it didn't hit me how big this was. And then it kept hitting me because then we, went right into Dead and Company after that. And it's like, it never
Yeah.
stopped and hasn't really since then. And I felt like Fairly Well opened up this, everyone thought we were crazy. Everyone thought Shapiro, Jill, and I were nuts. Like Further had never, Further, yeah, they'd sold out Madison Square Garden once or twice, but like really was a, most of the bands were not drawing stadium size. Whatever reunion band we put together, The Dead, the other ones, at best we might sell out in Alpine Valley on a weekend, but like it wasn't a
Right.
stadium band. So what the hell made us think we were going to sell out 5 football stadiums? And we did easily.
Yeah.
And I think we, the gamble we took is there are way more Deadheads out in this world than Come to Further or Rat Dog, Phil and Friends, or even The Dead, or like there are a lot of people who just checked out. And if this is going to be the last time the core 4 of Bobby, Billy, Phil, and Mickey are going to play together, that some of them might wake up for it, and they did, and then they stuck around for Dead and Company, clearly. And as much as people maybe didn't believe us at the time, Bobby, Phil, Bill, and Mickey have still not shared a stage together since then.
Yeah.
And so that was really what we were saying Fairly Well to, not the 4 guys individually making live music. I mean, they'll all make music till they physically can't anymore, every single one of them. I have no doubt about that. But the enormity of them coming together and saying this might be the last time the 4 of us are on stage together definitely brought people out, and clearly they stuck around for Dead and Company, which is just pretty amazing. They realized how much they missed it and missed all of it, and now, I mean, we meet teenagers every day at every show, whether it's Dead and Company or Wolf Bros or everything. Like now the grandkids are coming out. I mean, it's gone multi-generational, and it's an amazing thing to just witness happening. And it's such a testament to the songbook, Garcia Hunter, Barlow Weir, everyone who contributed to it. I mean, I remember Steve Parrish at Fairly Well saying something. I'll have to summarize it, something along the lines of that like from him and Ramrod, from that first day in 65 to me and Sharuki and whoever else is standing there right now in 2015, none of this happens without everyone that came and went at some point in the mix, from the Dennis McNallys to, Cameron Sears, everyone who's come and gone from this organization is why it can still be doing this, staring at we're in next year's the 60th anniversary all of a sudden, and that's insane.
It
That's
is
insane, because
insane.
I can't think of a band. Can the Rolling Stones fill a stadium without Mick or Keith? Can the Who do it without Peter Roger? And even now their shows are smaller and smaller. I mean, to me, that's, as Bobby always says, the songbook is so much bigger than any of the individuals are, and that's why he can have these dreams and believe them, where he's long gone and a bunch of 18-year-olds he doesn't recognize are in a stadium playing this music. It's just been incredible.
It's certainly felt that way. Living in Chicago through the Dead and Co. years, and living in Wrigleyville and watching Wrigleyville turn into that scene that you were talking about in Nassau in that in the late 80s and early 90s, of just, wow, it's not Cubby Town anymore, it's Deadhead Town, and here's that scene still happens. And it's amazing that people are still able to have that experience of the Dead rolling through town and changing everything for a little bit. And you can get swept away by it still. You can still tour with them and, travel down the West Coast and see them at the Gorge and then all the way down at the Forum. And, it's the fact that experience was able to still happen was, I'm certainly lucky to have been able to experience it, and so many others are too. And yet you're the guy that puts it on. So of course you can't be stuck in the middle of it going, wow, look at how big Soldier Field is, and look at all the
No, you can't. You can't. I can't. I have had to train myself. I can enjoy a moment for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not so focused in the zone that I don't appreciate what's happening around me. But to really sit back like a fan, it's got to happen after it's gone. And in a way long gone, because even right after it's done, I'm still in that got to approve 250 Blakesburg photos. Nope, here's 200 more Chloe photos. So I got 500 photos to approve in 24 hours, and then these people want this track. I got to approve. I got to approve this track or this clip. Or I'm still in that mode for for a short while after shows or runs are done, even, or tours. But it's usually like a month or two late. Like I still haven't done it with the Den Company final tour. I still haven't done that moment where I start putting on the Nugs recordings, getting in the car and just like appreciating it. That tour was so good. I actually feel like I can do that anytime, and someday I will, just when I'm ready for it, not now. But Fairly Well, I wanted to do it right afterwards. I just have to
Yeah.
experience what the heck I just worked through a tornado in. Because that was kind of what it felt like. It just felt like a nonstop tornado the whole week. It went by so fast. I couldn't even believe when it was over already. I was like, shit, can we do it again next week?
You're like, let's do it again for
um,
the next 7 years now.
and there was actually, for a moment, we almost did. I think Shapiro even got really excited and started holding the garden for that fall. And it's like, you
Let's
can
hold
do
on.
that, but this other thing, because we had really not told, we'd really kept Dead and Company that big a secret. It's like,
Yeah.
oops.
Yeah.
um, but that was the natural progression of things, because Bobby's a tour guy, and he wants to, he wants to bring the music where it can't always get to. That's why you'll see Wolf Bros go through Omaha and Des Moines and places like that, and because he really believes it's important to keep doing that. And then, and Phil has said for years he's done touring, and so it was never going to make sense for the four to keep up on the road anyway. Um,
And it feels that when people are still able to go see Phil and Friends shows, that's a show I haven't been able to, or been lucky enough to see yet, that he's able to give himself to that in the way that he would like to. And it's different than the way that Bob would give himself to an entire tour. And
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
incredibly, it's unbelievable what Bob can pull off for an entire tour. Cause it's not, we were talking about a legacy act that doesn't give it every single night. I
Right.
mean, that's just not true of Bob Weir.
No,
And through this last tour as well, I got to see a lot of those shows, and he is still just given all of himself on almost every single night. And it's
yeah, he's
yeah,
always
it's a
pushing
lot.
forward.
Yeah, it's a
He's
lot to
always
do.
pushing forward, and it's all kind of the same. One thing I learned very early on working for Bobby is that it is all, he doesn't really see it as this side project, that side project, this thing, that thing. It's all Grateful Dead to him, whether it's Rat Dog, whether it's Mickey and Planet Drum, whether it's Billy and the Kids, whether it's Phil and Friends. It's all Grateful Dead to him.
Yeah,
It's all part of the same thing. It's all part of the same story. And for him, it all has to keep moving forward in some way. So it means he's always going to come and say, hey, let's dust off this song, or try this new song. I mean, I know a couple of things he's woodshedding. I mean, Wolf Bros may not have a date until August this year, but he's already in his mind working on what he wants Wolf Bros to do that they haven't done before. And I was doing that in Mexico even. I remember thinking, it might be 6 months for a Wolf Bros date, but hey, go, keep going. It's all kind of the same story for him, and so I've learned to sort of take on that sort of approach to it. It's all Grateful Dead. These guys have that right after almost 60 years between the four of them to call anything they want Grateful Dead. I mean, it's their thing, and what Phil does is, he's also, he doesn't, I don't think he talks interview wise about looking towards the future like Bobby does, but it's obvious he is, because he's centered his Phil and Friends bands around his son Graham. And Graham, I believe, is like the music director, puts together the set list, and does a lot of the work I do with Bobby,
yeah,
and centers it on that and what excites Graham and who's Graham excited to play with, and that puts also a cool different perspective on it, because Graham is he's got his own taste in music, and to those are the people who'll bring it to Phil and Friends, which might not be who Phil would bring in himself, or if it was up to someone who's a jam band guy, who that person would bring in. Because Graham, if you hear his own music, it's Midnight North. It's way more Americana. It's way more along the speed of what Bobby likes and does in
yeah.
reality. And so it's got sort of that stamp on it, but that's kind of awesome, because it's definitely out of the box and makes it newer and fresher, and it keeps it moving forward. And there's no reason why that isn't as authentic to Grateful Dead as anything Wolf Bros are doing, or Mickey or Billy for that matter. And they should have space to do these things, because obviously a lot of compromise has to happen when you get four different visions back together in the same boat again.
Yeah, and it's we're lucky that we're able to get them, see them express in the way that they can, and in the way that they do, individually and whenever they're together. It's yeah, I mean, that's all I've ever felt, being able to go see any faction of the Grateful Dead whatsoever is just lucky, just lucky to.
Yeah, yeah. And when they weren't playing in one band, like I mean, I started my career with Warren Haynes, so I wasn't I wasn't in Weird World. We got introduced into Phil World around 99, but those years in between 6, 7, 8, I mean, I would see everybody. I was like, like I didn't need them to be together. In fact, in my mind, I remember actually thinking, well, since they tour separately now, it's like every month I could see Grateful Dead because they're never going to hit the city at the same time and compete with each other. So it's like February I could see Bobby, March I'll see Phil, April I see
Yeah.
Mickey, May I see Billy. I was like, this is something cool to do every month, and that's in addition to all the good cover bands that were around then and whatnot. Or Mark Saunders went on a big tour right after Jerry died and was doing a lot of the Garcia band stuff, and then Melvin Seals kept the JGB thing going, and so it just felt like just more opportunity for me because I always still had that sort of youngest person frame of mind going, from all the like, you missed all the good stuff, even though we're seeing the Grateful Dead in 88 and 89. It still felt like that chase. I can't miss it. I gotta see all the good stuff. I gotta see it while I can. There was still always that like drive to see as much as possible, and it never really went away. Then I realized, shit. Well, now that I'm a law school dropout, I better find a way to start getting paid to do this because it's gonna get tricky real soon as 25 is approaching and whatnot.
Yeah. And I mean, your fandom and your history comes through in the way that you direct and pick set lists. I mean, especially in this last tour, it was just like, yeah, I would have picked this set list. I would have. I know some people who would have been excited about this set list.
I try, it can never just be about what I want to hear, though.
Yeah.
Maybe the first set list I ever wrote was a little bit like that, but because I do have to with Dead and Company keep Bobby, Mickey, John, and for a while there Billy all happy, and that's not an easy feat to do. Plus I need to be fair with the singing, and I have it where like Bobby singing 5 songs in a row and then John sings 1 and then Bobby sings 3 in a row, so you see, so it's like a lot of times what you would want favorite as a fan just can't happen because you need to balance singers or things like that, and so I can't ever be too selfish or greedy about it because I always have to sort of keep those sort of mandates, certain things Bob's taught me about writing set lists that I have to keep in mind, and then certain things I learned what John, every band is different. When I was doing Further, I had to learn what Phil really wants, and then Rat Dog was a whole different beast. Every different project's kind of got a different thing. We did the Campfire Band with Bobby and those guys from the National, and that was a whole different world because those guys were like, the National guys were like, this is our chance to be in the Grateful Dead, and so we want all the cool moments, every city we were in, they wanted every song that name dropped the city, they wanted that crowd roar, they wanted they wanted every Grateful Dead moment that they could come up with, and right down to the last show they did with us, they were basically like, can we just do that greatest hit set night, can we just do that estimated ISCAR, like that kind of show, and we did that kind of show with them, even though it wasn't necessarily a band that made sense for that kind of show, but we did it was great. That was definitely a band really made for the Blue Mountain album and that style of music. But sure, let's take a chance at them getting psychedelic too, and it was great. They did. So a lot more goes into it than I just can't get away with writing Matt Bush's greatest hits nights. It probably wouldn't fly. It probably wouldn't fly in reality. In fact, I remember I got to write at Pine Knob this past summer my own 50th birthday set list, and at the end of the day, it was really just like any other show. I think I threw my favorite song that Bobby sings from his own songbook is Black Throated Wind, and I put that in there. But beyond that, like I think I don't even remember if I put a Wharf Rat in there or not, because that tour we did an unusual amount of Wharf Rats for some reason, and I remember thinking it's overkill actually at the moment. But I can't remember. Again, I can't remember. It's crazy that I can't remember my own 50th birthday set list, but I can't remember any set list after I write them. Even at the show that's playing out, like people make fun of me every time they're playing ones. I have to look at what's next, even though I just wrote it, the night before or whenever. Right. I can't, in the heat of battle, I can't remember anything that's coming up next. And then when it's over, like I have to take out the paper and go, oh, right, we did, that, and then that. And like, I can't, I don't know what it is, but once I guess it's clearing space for the next one to come in or something. But I can't remember them after I'm done with them.
If you were super precious about every single one of them, that would make the job.
I try to save some. I do. I'm like, I really love this one. I should save it at home. And I've got this pile of like, that's a few too many. Like, I wouldn't even know where to begin. These are just the favorites from the past 12 months. So
wow.
No
so all of them.
Well, pretty much it feels like, and that's not counting what already toppled over.
Right. And that was my conversation with Matt Busch. Uh, felt really lucky to sit down and talk with him about uh, his career and also those shows. It's such an interesting perspective to have a dad who is so into jazz, and you're trying to show him the most ridiculous dead stuff, and he's like, this is barely it for me. I mean, for the most part, when you show someone Vanita anything, they're like, "What is going on in this? What are they doing?" And so super cool perspective from Matt to grow up with, and then let that lead him into his career and all that stuff. Again, I just Matt has been so cool to me in the last year, and just a kind individual, and so super happy to get to know him. If you're interested in other episodes, we have got other episodes out right now, some really cool ones. One of those being with Daniel Donato. You can find that on Spotify and YouTube and everywhere you're looking. Daniel has had a huge last couple years here, and so hearing him kind of detail his process and also kind of the beginnings of his journey, it's a very cool interview, and he's a very smart dude. I also got to last minute little burp there, just a little burp in the outro of the Mad episode. That's awesome. Also got to interview John Barber just this last week. He was not planned on being on the roster of the podcast, but Disco Biscuits is on tour. Disco Biscuits also has a new album out right now. So I got to talk with John while they're on tour, and I put it up on the Patreon, and that's for free. You can of course become a member and get access to all the bonus clips on Patreon and all the everything. But I mean, I left that up there for free because it's too good. It's a great interview. So go check out that interview with Barber. Um, Make sure you're subscribing onto the YouTube, and if you're listening on Apple Podcasts and you don't mind giving us a review, that would really help out. But until next time, guys, have a great show.